started my career in enablement at IBM in 2016. And it was because I had been through an acquisition. IBM had acquired a small company I worked at called Ustream. I was the director of sales for Ustream, and so my role was to make sure that the sales team was, selling our product. And once we were acquired by IBM, I
Mhm.
was asked by IBM to be the subject matter expert for our product. And so IBM asked me to literally travel all around the world and train IBM sellers and partners on our product, which was a streaming SaaS video product. It was new to the IBM portfolio. So it was really important for me to make sure that I was very strategic in the way I would enable to convince the IBM sales force first to make sure they remembered our product when they were talking to customers. So within 3 months of doing that, I was asked by our VP of sales in our business unit if I would be interested in taking on a full-time enablement role. And having spent 3 months doing enablement, I realized that was my calling and my passion. What I loved about it first was I was able to um, dynamically change an opinion of a seller to make sure that they would remember the product. So I had to sell to them first. So I was using my selling power, but I was also noticing that when you do enablement, you are able to reach more people than just the team that you're managing. So I thought it was really strategic and exciting to be able to represent a bigger number that the product offered. And so that's when it made me realize enablement was my next world to live in, because I was going to be able to influence on behalf of the company and the product a bigger picture, right? So I spent 3 years at IBM as a worldwide enablement lead for our video product. And that video product morphed into the Watson Media business unit, which was super exciting. So as we continue to change and evolve, my role was still clear. It was to make sure that all of our customers, partners, and sellers understood the value of our product. And the way I was going to be able to do that best was to make sure that I continued to storytell and give really great information on how the product works, but more importantly, who uses it, why it's important, and how it would make a difference in an organization. So after spending 3 years at IBM working in an enablement function, I elected to leave to go to a smaller organization because I felt that I was better suited for smaller companies. So I took on the role of the first enablement hire at Udemy. And so my goal was make enablement happen. They had never had enablement at that company, and it was the Udemy business unit that was selling B2B seat-based subscriptions of learning solutions.
Mhm.
And so, of course, the first thing I tackled quickly was onboarding. When a company is rapidly growing and they're bringing in their first enablement hire, you have to learn quickly how to prioritize. And when I realized that we were going to bring in new people every other week, it clicked on for me that onboarding was going to be key for me to support first. Building out a solid onboarding program then helps you to bring in new people and support them to have them meet to the level where everybody else is at. So I tackled onboarding first. I created an onboarding program to fit the needs of the SDR team, the AE team, and the post sales team of CSMs. After tackling onboarding, what I did next is I looked at the company goals. At Udemy, we use OKRs. And so it was very strategic for me to see what is the company looking to do goal wise. And so I started to align and create programs that were mapped to the OKRs. So I next created a quarterly enablement program. And each quarter, the enablement program topic was related to company goals and OKRs. So each quarter, we would keep the same kind of process. We would come together to learn. It was every Thursday. Everyone on sales and customer success would come to the Thursday session. There was some pre-work first, there was the actual live session, and then there was post-work to show application. So the
Mhm.
quarterly enablement program was a really good way to establish a culture of learning and a consistent, scalable program that swapped out content, but it always brought everyone together. Everyone knew Thursday was learning day. So that
Mhm.
was really great. I spent 2 years at Udemy, really created, a lot of the onboarding, of course, created a lot of the everboarding content, which is continuous learning, and also helped to promote upboarding. So that third bucket is taking existing employees and upskilling them to help them do what comes next. What comes next could be, is it an SDR becoming an AE? Is it a commercial AE becoming an enterprise AE? So I think it's really important to remember as an enablement leader that you want to meet your employees where they're at. And I think that employees are living most of the time in three main buckets. They start in their onboarding bucket. You've got to know and understand when that bucket gets replaced with their everboarding bucket, who's in that bucket. That's most of the company. And then, of course, the upboarding bucket is the core group of people that are ready to do something next. So I think that at Udemy for specifically, that was a really great learning experience for myself first. And I carried that concept of those three buckets forward when I went to Drift. When I went to Drift, I was hired as the first enablement person for the customer success team. So, as you can probably imagine, I'm super excited to say I've been the first of a few different times. And so, what I think I gravitate to is the foundation building and the organization and structure of building enablement as new. There's a lot of companies that have enablement, which is really great. I love to sit in a place where there's a blank slate and a lot of things to accomplish. So at Drift, there was already a sales enablement function, but there was no enablement on the customer success team. So what I was doing was bringing in all my great sales experience, all my great enablement experience, and really building that culture of learning for the post sales side. And so naturally, again, I brought with me the things that I had already learned. Step one, tackle the buckets. So I built out the onboarding program. Onboarding for the customer success team has to be slightly different, of course. It's got to be role based, it's got to be customized, and it's got to meet the needs of the metrics and ramp for customer success specifically. Then, second is tackling the everboarding bucket. What is the continuous learning that we can do? So I created the customer team enablement series. If you call it a series, people want to show up, right? They want to binge watch it. You don't want to miss a series. So the customer team enablement series, again, was a weekly program. It was aligned to the company goals. And for this particular role at Drift, I partnered regularly with our VP of customer success. And so I wanted to know and understand what his goals and priorities were so that this weekly enablement series was meeting those company goals. Of course, there was also the upboarding bucket. So across the post-sale side of the house at Drift, you could start supporting a smaller company segment like the commercial space, and you can move up and upskill yourself to an enterprise book of business. So you want to remember to that third bucket of employees that are looking to be promoted to the next level. So building out content and build out learning for them was super important. So I think that's a good summary, I think.
Yes, it's a very extensive summary.
Yeah.
And sounds like you have a great experience. So I must ask, having all this experience, I think part of the enablement work is detecting gaps in performance and then making sure reps are being trained on top of them. So a question is, how do you document the gaps that you find in reps performance?
I think it's really important to establish a learn, practice, teach back cadence. And that was something that I didn't solidly do first at Udemy, but definitely perfected at Drift. And the learn, practice, teach back cadence can be in each of those buckets. So for each learning that you provide, you want to remember that people cannot possibly just learn in the moment, just in time learning, and go and apply it right away. You have to validate and check for understanding. So in your onboarding bucket, when you're teaching new content, they learn, and it could be with a subject matter expert, they go to a Zoom session, or they can read content. The practice is that middle layer that I think a lot of people miss. The
Mm-hmm.
practice is I just learned something, let me digest it on my own and let me practice it. And practice is super important because if you just go from learn to apply, you're missing that point in time where you can establish muscle memory. And muscle memory, I think, is super critical for learning and applying. So the practice component is practice on your own. A lot of times, practice could be I will give you a scenario and it's a little activity. A practice could also be a quiz, right? And then the teach back. So the teach back is validation, and teach back can come in a variety of ways. It could be if you're my manager and I'm learning something new after practicing, I'm going to tell you what I just learned. It's true that the fact is, if you can teach something, you know it. And so if you miss the teach back component, you don't really know or validate that a person truly knows something. You're just expecting them to go use it. So if you find in either the practice or the teach back that someone has missed something, what you should do quickly then is pivot and change and say, you're not ready to perform yet. I need to give you more learn, or I need to give you more practice. I know from your teach back, for example, you have missed something. So if you establish that cadence in your onboarding program, for all the other learning and training that you do, it should be part of the regular process. The employee expects that to be the way it's done, and they're going to naturally want to do the practice in the teach back, and they're going to want to perform in the teach back better. So you might over time reduce gaps because you have a more solid cadence established up front. But of course, if there are gaps, what you need to do is quickly make sure that you either put them back in the beginning for learn, practice, teach back again, and or work with the manager on a more customized approach. You definitely have to work with their manager no matter what to make sure that you're meeting the needs that the manager has, because if it's a seller, for example, they might have certain revenue targets to meet, certain activity targets to meet. You want to be aligned with those what those targets are to make sure that the program that you put them in is really built to get to those targets.
Great tips. Another thing, it's not just about closing gaps, but it's also about detecting who are the A players in the company and what can I do to make everybody like them or perform like them. So a question is, how do you see enablement work in replicating A players game for other reps in the revenue org?
There's two programs that I ran both at Udemy at Drift that I wanted to talk about. And this is to identify what good looks like, which is identifying A players and the best practices. So at Udemy, every year, the product marketing team recreates or refreshes the narrative deck. It's normally the slide deck that the sellers use for the first meeting doing discovery with a customer. So what we established is a narrative certification program. So the certification program serves two purposes. One is it makes sure that everyone knows and understands the content, and we do the learn, practice, teach back to validate that they have the right knowledge and can practice it and showcase they know it before they go into the world and actually do it. What happens during this certification program, though, is you will find the people that are really good at doing certain things. I learned in that certification program there are some people that do every single step really great, but there's also certain sections or snippets that you want to pull so that you can curate what good looks like in the entire process. So what I did to build that certification program is I used Gong and we built scorecards. And so when the team had to do their learn, we came to a session, we learned the content. For practice, I assigned each rep with a peer and they were presented with a scorecard in Gong as the guidance for success of what good looks like. And so if I'm practicing with you, I'm going to do my pitch to you. You're going to have the scorecard up. You're going to give me a score and you're going to say, hey, Nieka, you did really well at the beginning. You didn't really ask many discovery calls. Go practice that again. And then what I'm going to do is the same for you. And then what we're going to do is take each other's feedback, fine tune and change our process, because then we're going to do our teach back to our manager, right? And the teach back is the formal certification. So it's the same step. I am going to perform the narrative or, discovery call. My manager is going to be on the call with me. We're going to role play. They'll have the scorecard up in Gong. And at the end of the call, they're going to give me a score. And what we did at the end is each manager of the teams would vote for their number one rep. And their number one reps were then presenting in a company meeting what their calls looked like. So then everyone was able to see and hear what good looks like. So that certification program, you can package that and you can use that for a bunch of different steps, right? We used it for the first call, the discovery call. I repeated that process at Drift. We did the same thing. First call, narrative, right? And a Gong scorecard attached. Because again, it gives the opportunity to have people really shine, and you give the opportunity for managers to vote and nominate, and it gives the opportunity for everyone in the organization to hear what good looks like. So I think that kind of program really helps in showcasing that. The other one that I wanted to talk about, again using Gong, is at Udemy, we were looking at the top 5 enterprise sales team members, and we were wondering, what is it that they were doing to sell multi-year contracts and higher ARR because there were some obvious things we knew they were doing, but we really wanted to look at data. What are the facts about these sellers? What can we pull? So we used Gong and the revenue intelligence board as well as the trackers. And what we learned, believe it or not, is there were top three things that those sellers were doing in every call from discovery all the way through to close. And one of the top three things we didn't expect, they were talking about the value of customer success. And the value of customer success was not only are you going to buy our product, but you're going to invest in the people that are going to help you to make the product work for you. And those top sellers talked about that right from discovery all the way through the sales process. And so what we did then as enablement is, wow, we got to talk about customer success. And that became a learning program of what good looks like.
Sounds like a great initiative. So maybe another question is, you have all those initiatives, and how do you actually measure the impact of those initiatives, and how do you attribute it to actually revenue?
Sure. So that's where it gets tricky with enablement, right? Because I will never say I have directly impacted revenue. What I feel comfortable saying is I've influenced behavior change for revenue as a byproduct to be influenced. You have to use your words wisely because you will be expected to produce hard measurement if you want to say you have directly impacted revenue. I think if you say you have influenced revenue change through offering all these programs, what you can show, for example, is let's go back to the Gong tracker of customer success. After we noticed that the best sellers talked about customer success from discovery on, what we were able to see is, are the rest of the teams now mentioning customer success in discovery calls? Check the box, yes or no. If that happened, two other things might happen as a result. And we saw this. Sometimes the sales cycle was shortened because the value of the offering was more clear. And the customer was more excited because not only were they buying a product, but they were buying a team, right? And they really liked that. And they're like, yes, this must be for me, right? The other thing that's measured is those top sellers, they were selling bigger contracts and longer term. So the next thing we wanted to measure is, does talking about the value of customer success then, if it doesn't shorten a sales cycle, does it result in higher ARR or multi-year contracts? Yes or no. So you want to be very careful. If you want to create a program like that and you want to use data and metrics, make sure at the end you know how to measure and show and validate that you actually have influenced a change.
Cool. Great answer for a tricky question for enablement leaders.
Yeah.
So maybe last question. How do you like your coffee?
How do I like my coffee? Okay. I have an espresso machine and I have a very specific coffee that I like to make myself. It's a double espresso shot. And I also have one of those automatic frothers. You plug it in, so it's electric frother. So rather than using the coffee machine frother that's like, and I always mess that one up. So I really like to use the electric frother, and I like to put a little bit of coconut cream, coffee creamer, and a little bit of soy milk. And so I froth up the milk and I add it to my double shot of espresso. So that is my preferred coffee.
Sounds like a coffee I should make myself.
Yeah, it's really yummy.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Nieka. I think
Sure.
it was a great interview.
Yeah.
Um,